Gentleman is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Revise and extend, if I may. Mr. Speaker, before I begin, I want to thank Chairman Ross Layton for her support and Mr. Smith for his help. I also want to thank some key staff members whose hard work and efforts on the bill have not gone unnoticed. Elise Anderson, Kalinda Stevenson, Yolande Pablet, Steve Stombress, and Kyle Nevins with the Majority Leader's office. They have been very, very helpful, and I am grateful for their help. This past January, in the wake of increasing violence, targeted attacks, and heightened discrimination against Christians and other religious minorities in Iraq and Egypt, and persisting concerns in Afghanistan and Pakistan, among other nations, I introduced bipartisan legislation, H.R. 440, which would require the administration to appoint a special envoy to advocate for religious minorities in the Middle East and South Central Asia in order to make this issue a foreign policy priority. Since introduction, this legislation has garnered widespread bipartisan support with nearly 80 co-sponsors. I want to thank Anna Eshoo, the lead Democrat in the House, for her work on this. Also, companion legislation is introduced now by Senators Roy Blunt and Carl Levin. The legislation has also been championed by a host of faith-based organizations and the diaspora communities who recognize the importance of ensuring that the vulnerable communities have an advocate within the U.S. government and around the world. Shortly before introducing this legislation, I chaired a hearing at the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission on the recent spate of attacks and the ongoing persecution of Christians in Iraq and Egypt. Commission members heard testimony about the increasing sectarian tensions in the two countries and the need for greater U.S. attention to the plight of the religious minorities. The hearings was held prior to recent events in the Middle East, which have in some cases created a political vacuum that have left religious minorities particularly vulnerable. I heard this fear expressed time and again during a recent trip to Egypt. Religious minorities throughout the region, including those who are Jewish, Ahmadis, Baha'is, are under increasing pressure. In fact, many of these ancient faith communities have been forced to flee the lands that they've inhabited for centuries. Consider some of the following. Last October, at least 70 people were killed during a siege on Our Lady of Salvation Church in Baghdad, making it the worst massacre of Iraqi Christians since 2003. Iraq's once vibrant Christian community population has been reduced by at least a half since 2003. This would be tragic under any circumstances, but it is especially so given the rich ancestral heritage of this indigenous community. Apart from Israel, the lands and people of modern-day Iraq are mentioned with greater frequency in the Bible than any other country. Abraham, Jonah, Nineveh, Esther, Daniel, all hail from Iraq. The Christians of Iraq today still speak Aramaic, the language that Jesus spoke. In Afghanistan and Pakistan, countries where the United States has invested its treasure and its lives of countless brave American soldiers, persecution of Christians run rampant. On November 7 last year, a Pakistani court sentenced Aziz Bibi, a Christian mother of 5, to death for the crime of blasphemy. Only after intervention by the international community was her execution delayed. Her fate still remains at this moment unclear. Pakistan's blasphemy laws are often used to victimize both religious minorities and Muslims. Earlier this year, Punjab's influential governor, Salman Taseer, was shot and killed by his own bodyguard, who reportedly told police that he, quote, killed Mr. Taseer because of the governor's opposition to Pakistan's blasphemy laws. In April, Pakistan's Federal Ministry for Minority Affairs, Shahbaz Bhatti, a heroic man of faith whose courageous and outspoken leadership against his nation's draconian blasphemy law made him a prime target of extremist Islamist elements in the country. He was assassinated. Bhatti was the only Christian member of the Pakistani parliament. In an interview with the Washington Post, Fred Hyatt, Shahbaz Bhatti, quote, urged Americans not to forsake us or not to forget us, Pakistan's suffering religious minority community. Members of the Jewish faith continue to experience discrimination and persecution throughout the region. The Special Envoy for Anti-Semitism, Hannah Rosenthal, has noted that the Holocaust glorification is, quote, especially virulent in the Middle East media. If the international community and our government fails to speak out, the prospects for religious pluralism and tolerance in the region are colleagues' support for this bill, and again, thank the leadership on both sides for making this legislation a priority. I'm hopeful that this bill will overwhelmingly pass the House and declare a clear and unequivocal message to both the persecutors and the persecuted that the United States of America stands with those whose most basic freedom, the right to worship according to the dictates of conscience, is under assault. And thank the gentleman and yield back the balance of my time.